Another question I'll ask extemporaneously, because something I've been struggling with myself, is I want to avoid the Hemingway-esque, is that a thing? The Hemingway-esque section of dialogue where it's Hills Like White Elephants is the story I'm thinking of, where it's just line of dialogue, several lines without even a form of speech attribution. You just have to keep track of who's talking. I don't like that. I think most of the time, unless you're Hemingway and you're doing it for effect, and even if you're Hemingway, maybe add some description. What I see is two talking heads against a green screen. That world is not alive. But I'm also going to ding you if you spend 3 paragraphs telling me about the candelabra when I want to know what's going on with the characters. Yeah. It's another one of those things that's going to vary from story to story, book to book, all that stuff. But is there, in general, a good rule of thumb you have for how much description should be on a page versus how much dialogue, and keeping those scenes from one of those two extremes?
So in terms of I'll focus more on dialogue in this context. So in terms of the talking heads, as you're saying, and the missing dialogue tags, I think that you can really only get away with maybe 3 or 4 lines of back and forth dialogue in terms of character A says this, character B says that, character A, character B. I think that's about all you can get away with before the reader starts to lose track of who's speaking. And when you need to really infuse in some dialogue tags. And, also within that, I think that it's really important, when there is a certain, you don't necessarily want to have reactions after every single thing that a character says. But if you're having half a chapter is largely just this conversation back and forth between these two characters, and there's not really a lot else going on except for talking, we need to, first of all, that shouldn't happen. Just end of story. You shouldn't be spending that much time on just dialogue and a conversation between two people. But if that is necessary to the story for some reason, you need to break up that dialogue with, at least dialogue tags, he says, she says, whatever, but also reactions to what's being said. In terms of is the character saying something shocking? Are they imparting really bad news that you're going to cry over, or are they, is it really joyful, news that they're going to, jump up and cheer about? Or are they planning some kind of journey? What are they doing while they're talking? Because nobody just sits there and talks and does nothing. I mean, look at me. I'm gesturing all over the place with the camera while I talk. They're going to be running their fingers through their hair, or they might be getting up to do a chore or something like that while they're talking to somebody, load the dishwasher, or maybe they're packing a bag for a journey or something like that. Providing that balance between you want to make sure that the scene seems realistic, as if it would actually play out this way. Rarely do people just sit there and talk and do nothing else. So
that's something I've been trying to do myself, is because I want to get my setting description in there, is I'll have the characters specifically interact with the setting. So yes. Don't worry, I can tell you more about the candelabrum if my character is angrily dusting it while she argues with whoever.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So I mean, there's a balance to be struck there between you can definitely adequately set the scene while this conversation is happening. And it makes it more interesting for the reader too, because then they can actually see what's going on around them, actually giving some context for the surroundings and the background of this conversation is important.
And then, emotional depth was the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I know that's an expertise of yours. How so subjective of how much emotional depth should be there, and how to know when you've achieved it? Because it is a fine line. If you go too far and you get schmaltzy, what is it? Is it Oscar Wilde that said he was crying tears of laughter at Charles Dickens by the end because it was, bring on the terribleness for the orphans, continue to emotionally manipulate me. You don't want to go that far, but you also don't want to be so dry that there's no emotion. What are some telltale signs you look for when you're trying to decide where we're at on that spectrum of how well the emotional depth is going, and what's on the page versus what's below the surface?
So I think, something, of course, in moments of dialogue, I think is actually the place where emotional resonance and emotional depth is a place where it's actually difficult to to make sure that that's on the page. A lot of times authors will start to rely on what the characters are saying, and they're showing their reactions through dialogue and what people are actually saying, instead of showing those internal reactions. Because rarely do we just, like somebody says, oh, XYZ, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so shocked. Like, that's not what you say. You have this, like, internal physical reaction, and you have a thought process that happens in your head, when news is imparted to you. You have and they happen in an instant. Like, it's a flash. And we don't even really think about it, I think, in those moments when it's happening to us in real life, but you need to spell those out for the reader on the page and say, like, if they're given, some shocking news, they're going to take a second to process that and think about it. They're going to feel, like their stomach churning, or like they'll kind of startle back. Their shoulders will tense, or, like they'll grit their teeth, or their hands will shake, or, something along those lines, to give us a clue as to how they're reacting to this. Like, it shouldn't just be like, a quick rebuttal back in terms of like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. I can't believe that happened. Like, there should be more depth to it, and that's the thing, is that emotional depth doesn't necessarily just need to be like, oh, we're wallowing in our feelings and, feel bad for the orphans like Charles Dickens and so on and so forth. It should be just that you want to be in the character's head. Like, that's really what I mean when I talk about emotional depth, is making sure that I actually understand what's going through the character's mind pretty much at any given time, whether that's through a combination of dialogue or, physical internal reactions, thought processes, how they react to their surroundings, and so on and so forth. Like, you want to feel as if you are that character, and as if you're living this experience through that character's eyes and body, and so on and so forth. You can't just, that's where, the difference between showing and telling comes in, is, you can sit there and you can write a lot of dialogue back and forth, or you can, say like, oh my gosh, so-and-so felt shocked in this moment. Like, she couldn't believe it. Like, that's telling, whereas like showing those, that stomach churning, those hands shaking, the blood rushing to your cheeks, or, the dread creeping up your spine, those kinds of things, are what really tell us how the character feels. It helps us live in that moment with them.
Saw a brilliant tweet that I can't remember who said it, but I retweeted it. So check my timeline, esteemed audience, at MG Ninja. But somebody said that you've been told show, don't tell, but you should say experience, don't tell. Show us the full experience of the character. So, oh my God, where was that back when I was in high school and starting this? I really could have used that advice.
I really love that. Yeah, because that's really what it is. It's not like, showing the reader, it's allowing them to experience the world and the character with you, and everything that they're going through. Like, you should feel as if you're living it in their shoes.